Hi guys, welcome to the first video on the official Empyrean Audio YouTube channel. We are about to take a look at how I mix the guitars for Welcome to the Bear Pit, a song I wrote for my friend Bear's Twitch stream. Enjoy! So here we are in a project file I've set up for this. We've got mixed stems for all of the different instrument groups. So we've got bass, we've got drums, we've got synths, we've got guitars. We've also got the one-shots here I used for the drums. And then we've got two pairs of guitar DIs and a third duplicated pair for a little trick I'm going to show you later on in the video. That's the first pair of guitars duplicated. And then what we've got here in the mixer window, as you can see, we're using kind of a top-down mixing approach with a lot of stuff going on our mix bus, a little bit of stuff going on our instrument bus, and then a little bit more on our percussion bus here. That just allows us to get kind of closer to the final sound that I have in my head during the process, and then when we come to master it later, I'll take most of these off and start again from scratch, or just tweak these a bit further. So we're going to start here with our first pair of guitar DIs, and we're going to try and dial in kind of a tone that gets us, you know, like 90% where we're looking. So what we'll do is we'll load up Neural DSP archetype Pliny, which I'm really digging at the moment. This is what we used on the mix you just heard. We'll load up the preset I used just for convenience. And then what we need, I'm not using the built-in IR loader here, what I'm using is Ignite Amps NAD IR with STL tones. And the IRs I'm using here are a pair of IRs I exported out from the Get Good Drums Zilla pack. And essentially the way we've got it set up, in fact I'll load it up now so you can see, because it's a bit more of a visual explanation. So what we've got, if we find the preset, is, here we go, we've got essentially the oversized angled cab with the V30 UK, and it's kind of a false Fredman setup. It's not quite a Fredman setup because, you know, it wasn't recorded using a Fredman clip, but it's an off-axis SM57 with an on-axis SM57, with the off-axis blended down a little bit here. And I find it gives you kind of a super thick, meaty kind of tone without the weird kind of mid honkiness that the actual Fredman setup gives you. And what I did here was I exported this out, and then the other IR we're using is the same thing, exactly the same thing, but with the OS straight cab. And because those two cabs, they have a slightly different frequency response in the mids, what I tend to do is I put one on the left, one on the right, and it gives you a little bit of extra width without having to play around with any kind of stereo widening. So that's what we're doing here on our Rhythm 1 group. We've got a stereo instance of nabbed IR. This cab on the left, this cab on the right. So if we hear how that sounds on just the one guitar, obviously that's quite a good starting point because I'd already dialed in this preset. But in terms of what we're using on this preset, no boost, surprisingly. I mean, these are in drop C, these guitars. But I don't tend to like the way boosts sound on anything that's not too technical. I find it gives you kind of a weird nasally quality to the mid-range that I just don't really like. So I try to avoid using a boost whenever I can. And sometimes I'll resort to other things like low cuts and cutting out a bit of low mids before the amp. Luckily, because we had a good DI, we didn't have to do any of that here. Pickups I've got on my guitar are quite tight anyway, so we didn't really need any of that. So we've just got kind of everything basically on noon, except a little bit more bass, a little bit more treble, a little bit more presence. And then we've got the bright switch on. I believe this amp, I could be wrong, but I believe it's based on the overdrive channel of an SLO. That's what it sounds like to my ears. I could be totally wrong. It could be a 5150, who knows, with the archetype amps, but doesn't matter, sounds good. So then I'll copy that over to the left track. Now let's listen to that in the mix. So it sounds pretty good. It's pretty chunky, kind of thick, guttural lower mids that I really like from this kind of tone. So what we're going to do now is I do want a bit of extra kind of presence on this tone. So one thing I really like about the nabbed IR loader is this resonance knob. I find this really, really useful. I find it kind of acts a little bit like boosting the high band on a Pultic EQ. So what we'll do is we'll just bring that up in the mix just to see where we want to be sitting. That's just boosting the presence a little bit, and it's just making it kind of gel in with the top end of our mix, basically. So what we're going to do next is we're going to dial in the second pair of guitars. We quad track these guitars. So what we're doing on this is we're going to use the same setup. We're going to just boost the resonance already because we're probably going to want that. I find these IRs that I'm using are quite dark. They're very kind of thick and low mid sounding, which I like, but I do find I have to boost the presence on them quite often. That's fine. So what we're going to do is, that's a DI. On this, what I'm going to go for here, because we've got a really, really nice mid-range and lower mid-range character to this tone, what I kind of want to fill in is kind of a really aggressive, like almost disgusting top end kind of character. So we're going to use the Omega Granifier here. And like I did before, we're just going to load up the preset that I'd already dialed in, and I'll talk you through that after we've heard how it sounds. So as you can hear, it's not a particularly pleasant tone by itself, but I find it works in the context of the mix. So what we've got going on here is the granifier, high input mode, quite a bit of mids scooped out, and the voice switch flicked down, which also kind of scoops the mids, as you can hear here. It kind of scoops out a fair bit, around kind of 1K, it seems to me. Then we're boosting a bit of presence here with the detail knob, and then we've got the power tube mode on KT66, which again is a very, very kind of almost transistory sounding, like top end quality to it. If we switch between them, you'll hear what I mean. So as you can hear, the L34 mode, a lot more kind of lower mid based. 6L6 is quite balanced, as you'd expect, and then the KT66 is a very kind of aggressive top end, which is what we want, because we're kind of trying to fill in the gaps of kind of what we don't have in the other tone. The other amp has quite a smooth sounding top end, which doesn't necessarily suit this kind of song. So what we'll do is we'll throw that on the other guitar track, pan that left, and let's hear how that sounds. Cool, super gnarly. It sounds a lot better once you get a pair of them together. And then if we hear that together with the other tone, we have this. So we've kind of got a good starting point to work with that honestly doesn't require that much extra processing. So if we hear that all together now. So what we're going to do now is we are going to use a little trick that I picked up in a Nail the Mix session from the one and only Buster of Humanity's Last Breath and Viljata fame. Also the creator of the Odderholm audio bass libraries, which are absolutely incredible and you should grab if you can, because they are wonderful. But essentially what we're doing here is we are going to use a SansAmp sim to add back in a little bit of kind of aggressive pick attack that we lost by having such a gainy tone. So you can kind of combine the aggressive filth of having slightly too much gain on your tone with the aggressive gnarly pick attack that you'd get from the SansAmp sim. So what we want to do is we want to load up any SansAmp sim. I'm using the PSA 1000 Junior from Nembrini. It's great for using this trick, but there's also one built into Pro Tools, I think, that you can use. I don't use Pro Tools, and so I use this one. So I'm going to load up the preset that I used for this. With that preset, it will sound like this. So, absolutely horrible. Okay, so now we have our SansAmp tone. What we want to do is check our phase with our main guitar track. Because obviously, because it's a duplicated DI and we're using a different amp sim, you can run into phase issues. Yep. So what you want to do here is you can use any phase alignment tool for this. I'm going to use Auto Align, but there's other good ones by Melder, for example. Or if you have the balls, you can try and do it manually, but why waste your time doing that? So we'll use Auto Align here. So I'll send to 1. what we'll do is we will load up auto align again here on this track. So receive to 1. And then we will auto detect and see if that does a good job for us. So as you can hear there, when it detected, you could kind of hear a shift in the phase. So now, if we play those together, that's as in phase as I think it needs to be. So now what we're going to do, we're just going to copy that over to here. We'll check the phase on our right side this time. So now we will pan these again. So now what I'm going to do is kind of blend these in. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring the fader right down and listen to our guitars. And then we're going to bring our fader up just to find kind of the sweet spot for it, where it's not poking out too much, but you can get the effect of it. And we're going to do this in the context of the mix also. Now one other thing we're going to try on it is we're going to try some kind of aggressive parallel compression. I'm going to use Parallel Aggressor by Baby Audio. I find this thing really useful. It saves you setting up a separate bus and all that crap. Just throw this on whatever you want to use it on. We're going to use the preset I had already dialed in here. So this is what it will sound like. So that's adding some extra dirt and some extra kind of aggressive attack that we want. Now, you have to be careful with this because it is quite easy to go kind of overboard. So where it's such a unique sound, it's quite easy to get carried away with it and go overboard and make your guitar sound completely unnatural. All we're trying to do is kind of fill in the pick attack that we lost originally. This trick works especially well on kind of super, super low tuned guitars, where that initial pick attack is crucial for the kind of aggressiveness of the tone. So what we're going to do now is, now we're happy with those kind of three tones that we've dialed in, make up our kind of core sound. We're going to try some extra processing to get them to fit in the mix a little bit better than they already do. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try the old-fashioned Pultec trick on our rhythm guitars. So we're going to use You can use any Pultec plugin for this. I'm using Rare by Analog Obsession just because it's free and very, very good, but there are, dare I say, hundreds out there that you could use. So essentially the way this works is you want to set your low frequency band to either 20 or 30, depending on where the low mids of your guitar sit. The lower you're tuning, the lower you go, but either 20 or 30. We'll go 20, we'll try 30 after. And then we want to set a high frequency to 16. That's 16 kilohertz. What you want to do is you want to kind of dial in the boost and the attenuation at the exact same value. And what this does, in essence, is changes the low frequency response of your guitar, because the boost curve and the attenuation curve and this EQ are different. So you boost one, you attenuate the other, and it just changes the low frequency response of your guitar in a way that often works very well on a lot of sources to give you a very clean low mid. So let's hear how that sounds on 4. One additional note to plugin developers: please will someone make a Pultec plugin where you have a little link knob here between these two, so you can link these two and dial them at exactly the same time, at the same value. That would be wonderful, thank you. So let's hear how that sounds soloed and then in the context of the mix. So as you can hear, that takes up quite a bit of the kind of woofy kind of low mid frequencies. So now what we're going to do is we're going to dial in the high frequency band. Now with this, we're not going to use the same technique, we are just going to straight up boost it. So what that does essentially is gives us that kind of traditional kind of aggressive scooped low mid quality without having to scoop the mid on the amp. Now if you're using an impulse or a cabinet that has kind of a very airy top end already, I'd be careful with this. And if you are using a cab that has, you know, the typical kind of 3 to 4 kilohertz nastiness, way too much of that, I'd also be careful with that. Now, on that note, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of soothe, as is the done thing guitars and basically anything these days. But we're just going to use the default preset for now. And we're going to use that before the Pultec, just to see if we can get away with boosting a little bit more than we otherwise would. Yeah, it's not doing much, but it's just taking away a couple of nasty mid resonances that we don't want. So then what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our second pair of guitars. Now this pair of guitars, you can immediately hear the difference when we throw Soothe on it. It kind of just smooths out that mid-range whilst keeping that kind of aggressive top end that we wanted intact. And we're going to throw the Pultec on there also. Now this pair of guitars we can go a bit more crazy with this because we don't mind it being kind of super scoopy sounding because we're only wanting that aggressive top end from it anyway. After that, we'll just take Pro Q and we will put a low cut on here. You can find sometimes with the Pultec, it can add back in the kind of rumbly low end that you were trying to get rid of. So just throwing another low cut after it can help. And we'll do the same here. So that's sounding like mostly there. So we're just going to add a few more things on the entire guitar bus here. But then what we are going to do, we are going to just boost the 1K mid area just a little bit. Cool, so that's sounding fantastic. The last thing we're going to do is we're just going to throw a bit of tape saturation on it just to tame some of the transients and gel it in with the rest of the mix a little bit more. So as you can hear, that's kind of thickening up those low mids a little bit. So now we're just going to get our balancing right and we should be good. just for transparency's sake, let's just run you through what I'm doing on the kind of the mix bus and these instrumental and percussion buses. Basically what we've got going on is a percussion bus, which is basically just the drums and the one-shots. And then we're using a Pultec, bit of bus compression from a SSL style bus compressor, and just a trim here. And then we're doing the same thing on the instrumental bus here, basically the same thing. And we've also got track spacer here, which we're using to kind of duck just a tiny little bit when the transients of the drums hit. Then on the mix bus we've got Pro Q with this kind of EQ curve. We're boosting the lows in the middle channel, sorry. Dipping a little bit of 4K out, dipping a little bit of 350 Hz out, and then a little kind of subtle top boost. We've got virtual mix rack with virtual mix bus, and a little bit of harmonic enhancement there from Revival. Buscally mix, which isn't really doing all that much. We've just got a little bit of extra loudness coming from it. The good old no small time button, and some transformer saturation. Brainworks Master Desk, I absolutely love this plugin. It kind of makes anything, almost anything, sound listenable. We're not using the built-in compressor here. We're using the resonance filters. I'll play it with and without those just so you can see what those are doing. So as you can hear, those resonance filters are really taming some of the kind of whistly, screechy frequencies that are very, very prominent in, well, any heavy guitar-based music, really. And then we're just bringing a little bit of low end out, monoing up kind of everything below 80 Hz. That's basically all we're doing with this. I really just use that for the resonance filters. We've got the Better Maker EQ, which is essentially a mid-side capable Pultec EQ. And we're just boosting some low end in the middle channel and a bit of top in the sides just for kind of a subtle stereo widening. Tape machines. Just to kind of like thicken up the general kind of lower mid end of the mix. And finally Oxford Inflator for just loudness, basically. Cool. And that's everything that is being done after this guitar bus, essentially. Okay, there we go. That's the video, guys. Hope it was enlightening for you. I am going to share the multi-tracks and the mix stems for the song in a link which you can find below. So please do check those out. Do whatever you want with them. Remix them, use them for mixing or mastering practice, learn the song, post a cover, do whatever you want. So, hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to do the typical YouTube thing of asking you to like, subscribe, hit the bell button below to get notifications. And by the way, if there's any audio-y, nerdy, mixy, guitar-y things you want me to cover in a future video, please do let me know. I'll be trying to do as many of these videos as I possibly can. So expect to see more in the future. We'll be doing plugin reviews, tutorials, all that kind of good stuff. So please do check those out in future.